Joining me now to discuss it, Simon Rosenberg, president and founder of the New Democrat Network and a former campaign advisor for President Bill Clinton, and Mark Thiessen, a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for the Washington Post, and a former speechwriter for George W. Bush. Gentlemen, welcome back. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Happy New Year, Megyn.
So there is, Governor Chris Christie, a Republican, came out and said there is only one group to blame for the continued suffering of these innocent victims, the House majority and their Speaker, John Boehner. He is not blaming President Obama. He doesn't think it's FEMA's fault. He thinks it's John Boehner's fault for not pushing through a vote on the FEMA relief bill, or the Sandy relief bill, Tuesday night in the middle of the night after they voted on the fiscal cliff. Mark, does he have a point?
It's a really bad week to be a Republican, let me tell you. This has been an absolute debacle. This is a self-inflicted wound on the part of the House leadership. They spent so much time, they were so busy capitulating on the fiscal cliff that they didn't bother to explain to the American people why they weren't going to capitulate on this pork-laden Sandy relief bill. And so they've got Chris Christie and Peter King yelling at them and making Obama's case for him. I mean, the reality is, you know, you just had all those quotes from President Obama saying, I instructed people to do this, I instructed people to do that. It looks like he instructed congressional Democrats to load this thing up with pork. The bill, half of the money in this bill is for long-term mitigation efforts. To do with Sandy's victims. It's not for immediate relief of Sandy's victims. It's got money for fisheries in Alaska and Mississippi. It's got money for the roof of the Smithsonian. And so this bill is a monstrosity. And on top of that, it's, you know, the estimates of the cost of Sandy are between $30 and $50 billion. This thing is a minimum $10 billion and possibly double the actual cost of the storm. So Republicans should have had a better plan going forward in terms of explaining why they weren't doing this, have a scaled-back bill ready to go so they couldn't be blamed. But boy, this is a mess of their own making.
What do you make of it, Simon? I mean, the Republicans, at least Darrell Issa came out, and he said this isn't Speaker Boehner's fault. It's the folks who stuffed all that pork in the bill, and he pointed to the New York Senators Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand and said, if you haven't stuck all this extra stuff in there, it would have been an easy vote for us.
I think that both chambers and both parties are going to have to get used to the other guys doing stuff that they don't like and working it through. It's got to be built into the mechanism of how Congress works. I mean, we've got to get beyond this idea that the House always blames the Senate always blames the House. For the next 2 years, the House and the Senate are going to pass things that are going to have to be reconciled. It's going to be very difficult for, I think it's unlikely that the Senate will ever produce something that the House can vote on without changing.
Yeah, but that's a little off point, because what I want to ask you is, this is Chris Christie, who's not even in the Congress, saying, I'm telling you, as a Republican, he says, as a Republican, I am blaming the Republicans. I am blaming the House Republicans. It's squarely on their shoulders.
But it is squarely on their shoulders. And the reason why is that Speaker Boehner, what got a lot of the Republicans like Peter King and Chris Christie angry is that he promised to bring it up. What they were angry about was that he had promised to bring it up and to have it done before they left. He didn't keep his promise. It made a lot of Republicans, including House Republicans, very unhappy who were in the affected areas. And the point the Republicans who don't like what's coming out of the Senate, and Mark and I talked about this last week, Megyn, when we were on the show, is that this is what's going to happen again and again and again. And if what's going to happen is the House is going to bitch and moan that the Senate passed something that they didn't like instead of actually taking it on, going to reconciliation, and fighting it out in the normal order that how Congress works, they've got to stop complaining and rolling up their sleeves and getting this work done on time.
Is it that, or is it that, you know, they saw some hypocrisy in senators like Schumer, who they say had loaded in some of the pork, then expressing outrage that they didn't give it the vote that he wanted? I don't know, Mark, you tell me. There seems to be some Republicans questioning why this is also focused on the House Republicans as opposed to on President Obama, on FEMA. Where are they? They still have a bunch of money in the coffers, and why isn't it getting spent? Why is this all on John Boehner?
Well, you're right. I mean, they were right to oppose the bill. It is potentially at least $10 billion and potentially double the actual cost of the storm. There is no need to pass a $60 billion emergency bill this week. They could have passed a bill that was half that amount that would have provided aid to the victims and not been stuck with this, which is what they should have done. But look, you were talking about Chris Christie before. You know, Chris Christie ought to direct his fire at President Obama if he thinks this bill is so wonderful. Obama used him as a prop before the election And then once the election was over, so was the bromance. If President Obama wanted, he had a bill this week that the Republicans had to pass. It was called the fiscal cliff. He included money in there for hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars for Hollywood, for Goldman Sachs, for rum producers, for algae growers. I mean, there was literally $40 billion in tax expenditures in that bill, but he didn't have any money in there for Sandy victims. If Obama and Schumer thought this was such a priority, they should have included it in the fiscal cliff bill. They included everything else. So Chris Christie ought to talk to President Obama.
But, Mark, they passed the separate bill on the 28th before the fiscal cliff had been passed. They'd already gotten that done. Boehner promised everybody in town it was going to get done. It didn't. And now what we're going to see is the Speaker doesn't like the Senate bill. He's going to pass a different bill, and they'll have to work in the next week to 10 days to reconcile it and bring it together. But I think you're right. The Speaker blew this one. It's been a tough week for the Republican Party, and let's hope this thing can get done in the next week to 10 days.
Maybe that's why he was crying. I don't think so. I think he was actually moved to tears by this.
Megyn, neither of us cried today on your show.
But are you in favor or against the crying?
Mark, what do you think?
I'm in favor. I'm in favor. I'm not going to cry, but I'm in favor of Simon crying.
I think it endears a lot of people to Speaker Boehner. It makes me like him much more.
Oh, well, there you go. We'll leave it on a nice nonpartisan note. Thank you, guys. We'll wait until you get this next story.